We've got breaking news here, and this is easily one of the biggest Supreme Court cases of our lifetimes. The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case that will decide whether or not Donald Trump is eligible for Colorado's primary ballot after he was disqualified by that state's Supreme Court. What this means is that we will get a definitive answer from the U.S. Supreme Court after scattershot rulings going in both directions in states across the country as to whether the insurrection clause in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution will be upheld. In Colorado and Maine, for example, Trump has already been disqualified from the primary ballot, while in Michigan and California, he's been allowed to remain on the ballot. The decision from the U.S. Supreme Court will set a national standard and determine once and for all whether or not Donald Trump will be allowed to appear on the 2024 ballot, or whether he'll be disqualified in accordance with the Constitution. And look, I obviously understand the gravity of disqualifying the GOP's leading nominee from the ballot in an election year, but I support this disqualification because I also understand the gravity of ignoring the plain text of the U.S. Constitution, which states that no American who's engaged in insurrection or given aid or comfort to those who've engaged in insurrection are eligible to hold office. And so in the same way that no American who's under the age of 35 or who's not a natural-born citizen can be president, no insurrectionist is eligible to be president either. And ignoring the plain text of the Constitution to allow Trump on the ballot anyway sends the message that he is above the Constitution, that he is above the law, that he isn't subject to the same rules as everyone else, and that is effectively making him a dictator, because it would put him above the Constitution that the rest of our country's elected officials have to follow. Clearly put, that is what's at stake if the Supreme Court rules to allow him to appear on the ballot in 2024. And that's a point that was laid out perfectly by voting rights attorney and my Democracy Watch co-host, Mark Elias.
The Supreme Court has to wrestle with whether or not there is a line that can be crossed by the president for which there are consequences. If the U.S. Supreme Court says there is no line that can be crossed by the president and still have there be consequences, that will have profound consequences for the future. I mean, it means that presidents can commit open, flagrant crimes. You know, I read someone joked, does this mean that Joe Biden could kidnap Donald Trump and have him held hostage? You know, and he can't be criminally prosecuted. He can't be judged there's just no consequences. So what Donald Trump is arguing for in this case, like the immunity case, is lawlessness. It is for allowing a president to do anything, in this case, to incite a violent insurrection, to give aid and comfort to people who are trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. And look, Brian, we fought a civil war over this. The Congress and the states after the Civil War purposely, intentionally put this provision in the Constitution to prevent another situation in which a demagogue like Donald Trump threatens the fate of our country and our constitutional order. And if the Supreme Court says that's too old, that's too novel, that doesn't apply anymore, just imagine what we will see out of Donald Trump in the future.
And of course, to see more of Mark and myself and our series Democracy Watch, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Now, Trump's defense rests on this absurd notion that the insurrection ban doesn't apply to presidents. And I posed this exact question to Jamie Raskin, who was a constitutional law professor before becoming Congress's preeminent constitutional scholar, and here's what he had to say about the claim that the insurrection ban only applies to everyone else except the President of the United States.
I totally do not agree with that. You know, you would have to believe that the framers of the 14th Amendment specifically banned people from becoming electors for president and vice president, that is, being in the Electoral College, but not banning the president himself or herself. It just makes no sense. The president is the person who, as we saw on January 6, 2021, poses the most danger if he decides to overthrow the constitutional order and seize the presidency. So there's no textual exclusion for the president. The language is written in as comprehensive a way as possible. And it seems clear to me that the framers of the 14th Amendment wanted to sweep in the president along with members of Congress, members of the Electoral College, you know, and any other civil or military office. It just seems sweeping and comprehensive. And there would be no logic for saying that it shouldn't apply to the president when the president is potentially the most dangerous actor and has the resources at his disposal as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces in times of insurrection and in times of war. So I don't agree with that. I do think that Judge Wallace did reason properly when it came to Trump having actually participated in insurrection. And that's just an airtight and detailed and comprehensive part of the opinion. And she herself says that, it might sound preposterous to say that it shouldn't cover the president, but that was her reading. And it's all based on the idea that the president takes an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, whereas other people take an oath to support the Constitution. And Section 3 says that nobody shall hold an office who has previously taken oath to support the Constitution. And so that's a very thin reed to hang it on. Obviously, swearing to uphold and defend the Constitution is swearing to support the Constitution.
Right. Well, can you talk about why Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was put in place originally? Because I think the history here is especially important.
Yeah, I mean, the history is revealing. This is right after the Civil War. It's during the Reconstruction period. There were Confederates all over the South, former Confederates, who were planning a restoration of their power and wanted to get back into office. And originally, the legislative history is fascinating because originally the House wrote a Section 3 that was far more sweeping, and it said that anybody who participated in insurrection shall not be allowed to hold office or vote again at all. And when it got over the Senate, they said that is way too broad. We want to zero in on the bullseye core of people who really pose the greatest danger to the republic. And so they said, we're not going to make it about suffrage and franchise. We'll make it about holding office, and it will only be those people who actually held office before, swore an oath, and then violated the oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion. So you can see how it got drastically whittled down. But Donald Trump is right there in the center of the bullseye core.
So if the whole point of this provision in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was to protect this country by barring those who had engaged in insurrection from serving, why would they want to include a loophole excluding only the most powerful person in the country? It makes no sense on its face and is a testament to the tenuousness of the Trump team's arguments that all they have is some tortured and irrational interpretation of a provision that was literally put in place to protect this country from someone exactly like Donald Trump. And finally, it's worth discussing the fact that this is being decided by a 6-3 conservative court, a third of which was appointed by the subject of this case himself, Donald Trump. And I know that the conventional wisdom may be that it's already predetermined how the court will rule. And look, that may very well be the case. But for those naysayers and critics out there, I'd suggest that you heed the words of Mark Elias, who explains quite clearly how our submission to the right actually lets them off the hook and how we need to apply pressure even when all hope might seem lost. There's a begrudging or cynical acceptance from most people on the left that once this thing gets to the U.S. Supreme Court anyway, with its 6-3 composition, that they're going to rule in favor of Donald Trump being reinstated on the ballot. Do you share that belief?
Yeah, so I hate this sort of cool cynicism that has erupted on the left. You know, hope is the tool of winners, and progressives are winners. Cynicism is the tool of despots and tyrants. And so Donald Trump wants people on the left to be cynical because it buys into this frame. And look, you and I have been doing these videos for a long time now, and we heard the same cynicism on the left about whether the U.S. Supreme Court would rule against black voters in Alabama, whether the Supreme Court would rule against and adopt the fringe independent state legislature theory. And in the end, the Supreme Court did the right thing in those cases. And part of it was by lawyers. In those cases, it was my team, but lawyers, and people like you not succumbing to the cynicism, but making the Supreme Court confront the law as it is, the Constitution as it is. So I really think it's a mistake to see so many people on the left just kind of buy into the sort of too cool for school cynicism of the Supreme Court's rigged against you.
So all eyes will now be on the US Supreme Court, which will hear arguments from both sides starting on February 8th. And look for this case to be resolved quickly, given that primary elections will already be underway. And hopefully the Supreme Court decides to defer to the law and our Constitution over its fealty to the criminal who's currently got a stranglehold over the Republican Party. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.